Good afternoon, class. This is John again. I'm going to get right down to business. I'm trying to put concluding remarks on a objective we began today, which was trying to see how the revolution in the Atlantic world, or the revolutions that happened in British North America, which we spoke about last week, and the revolutions in Europe, particularly the French Revolution, how those compared and also how they influenced revolutions and dramatic upheavals in other parts of the world at this time. Of course, we're studying modern world civilization, so we aren't concerned with just the history of the West or Europe and the United States. We're looking at the world as a whole, but of course, the world is oftentimes going to be influenced, and there will be ripple effects of those events that happen, particularly in some of the more powerful, influential parts of the world. So today we're going to be looking primarily at Latin America and how the developments, historical events that happened in Europe and France, to a lesser extent the US, the American Revolution, how those found their way and how they impacted regions of the world like in Latin America. I gave a little definition of Latin American class. We're talking, for our purposes, about all of the parts of Spanish-speaking America that are south of the US-Mexican border. Pardon me. I talked about the hierarchy and some social concerns, and particularly how Latin America functioned during Spain's colonial period of rule there. And this was really consequential. The later decades and centuries of Latin American experience. In fact, Latin America, even to this day, bears a very strong imprint of those colonial, the colonial legacy. For example, the Catholic Church is a powerful institution in Latin America precisely because of the Spanish history there. Talked about how some of the social categories surrounding race and caste and how that has influenced things like privilege, so on and so forth. Those are all things that still impact Latin American culture even to this day. But they also bear a place in the story of how revolutions took place in this part of the world. So I left off in class today talking about how the European Enlightenment, the American Revolution, and the French Revolutions all had important consequences for Latin America. For starters, there was a group of Creoles, the sort of almost top of the Latin American social hierarchy. They were one step down from the Peninsulares. But the Creoles over time, particularly during colonial Spanish history, over time they came to resent the influence that the Peninsulare class had over them. This isn't all that unlike some of the frustration that some of our founders in the United States had with the elites from Great Britain who were brought over, whether they were military or governmental. It was easy for our founding class to resent being told what to do by people who had power essentially just because they were British. I mean, not so many Brits actually lived in the colonies, but there were a good number of Brits who were sent over to administer the colonies. And the Creoles, meaning Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, they had come to resent that sort of patronizing British authority in their lives. Similarly, in Latin America, there had grown a class, a social class of people who had become increasingly disenchanted with the Peninsulares' authority and power. So events like the American Revolution and French Revolution, which had been in some ways successful periods whereby foreign power or traditional power had been thrown off the present ruling class, these were inspiring. They were hopeful examples that Creoles in Latin America could inspire, that they could aspire to. And then even more specifically, a couple other ways in which this impacted Latin America, Spain actually intervened on behalf of the United States during the American Revolution. So in a roundabout way, the Spanish crown, by supporting, along with France, the U.S. Revolution, they had supported this revolution. We know that the French Revolution was brought about in part because the French king had supported the U.S. Revolution and had incurred debt as a result of it. So that was one way in which the American Revolution impacted the French Revolution. And then finally, on the French Revolution, we also know that Napoleon invaded the Iberian Peninsula, the home of modern-day nation-states like Spain and Portugal. And so for a brief period of time, when Napoleon moved in and took over, and French forces occupied Spain on the Iberian Peninsula, this was a time where those Creoles, that leadership, that second rung or that second level leadership class in Latin America, if they chose to act, this was a good time to do that. And sure enough, it's no coincidence that the timing of some of this happens at precisely that time. So if we move on to the Haitian Revolution, which happened in the Western Hemisphere, and most of you probably know that Haiti is a country in the Caribbean. It actually shares an island with the country, the Dominican Republic. Haiti is unique in the Western Hemisphere, and particularly in the Caribbean, I guess, as well, for being a French-speaking island. It was home of sugar plantations in the 1700s and 1800s. And the French ran it. Now, another thing that was unique about Haiti in the late 1700s and on into 1800 is that it was an overwhelmingly slave society. So of a total population of roughly 600,000 people, 500,000 of them were enslaved African Americans. And so this made it a really unique place. It's no surprise that the revolution in Haiti came from the bottom up. It was from people who were, and particularly black African Americans, who were fed up with their miserable existence, fed up with their lack of power, either socially or politically. And so by the 1800s, sure enough, there will be a revolt. And it's unique because this is going to be a successful slave revolt that turns into a full-blooded revolution. Now, since our objective is to compare how revolutions in places like the American Revolution and the French Revolution, how it compares with revolutions in Latin America, and I guess I should qualify this too, right? Because Haiti is not technically Spanish-speaking, it's French-speaking, but it's smack dab in the middle of Latin America otherwise, so we'll treat it as part of it, as part of Latin America. The Creole class, which was a small group, think 35, 40,000 white planter elites, they had hoped to, assert their rights much as the people in Paris and surrounding in France had asserted their rights to the King Louis XVI in mainland France. But in Haiti, this became a much more slippery slope. In 1793, the French Parliament, so now we're talking about the National Assembly, outlawed slavery. That was mildly nerve-wracking for the planter class in Haiti. And so this sort of set in place a slippery slope where the overwhelming majority of Haitian society, recently freed black slaves, now put forth and asserted themselves toward political equality and political power. And so by 1804, after a brief revolution, Haiti essentially falls and throws off its past history of political inequality. And this becomes a rather scary moment, particularly for white Creoles throughout the Western Hemisphere. It seemed like, just as like mainland European neighbors feared the French Revolution. If France can do away with its king, what does that mean for the kings in neighboring countries? Well, the planter class, meaning the slave-owning class, which now no longer owned its slaves, was fearful of what it would mean for a majority and an overwhelmingly majority black or African American island to turn itself to political equality. And so the Haitian Revolution was a really powerful and potent moment. Other places in Latin America, here's a picture of a relatively handsome man. He went by Tupac Amaru, or Tupac II. His European name was Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui, which is kind of a mouthful, so Tupac II will probably work better. But he was in the Andes, so imagine modern-day Peru, the former domains of the Inca Empire. And as the revolutionary bug, it's not a very flattering way to put it, the revolutionary virus, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Revolutions have done a lot of positive things throughout world history. But as that germ spread, there's an irony that happens in the Andes, and that is that some of the people who are agitating for revolutions over the colonial order, which had previously existed throughout Latin America, the irony is they're using European ideas and ideals, so like ideals that come from the European Enlightenment, such as one law applying to everyone equally, free press, free speech, free religion, equal trade, so on and so forth. These ideas are being used against Europeans. In this case, it's the native Andean peoples, such as Tupac II, trying to overthrow the white or European rulers that have been put in place to rule colonial Latin American society. And so in the 1780s, and here we are even before the French Revolution, between essentially the American Revolution and the French Revolutions, we see large numbers of native people rising up to challenge and take over the powerful city of Cusco, which is essentially in the middle of the former Incan Empire. And this was sort of an effort to impart to the native people their power and control over society. The Creoles, which is interesting, remember that second level, these are essentially European people who are living in Latin America, but who have pretty much a European background, a European bloodline, so to speak. They're going to be nervous about this because, of course, this looks like the native peoples rising up to overthrow the Europeans. So the Creoles in parts of Latin America, unlike their counterparts in, say, the United States, oftentimes are going to side with the crown because they are concerned about instability that might emerge. Lastly, I'll conclude with Mexico here with just the few moments that we have left. And, oops, sorry. In Mexico, we have the story of Father Hidalgo. Let's see if I can get back here or not. And he's going to be significant because he leads essentially a peasant uprising. Father Hidalgo is very instrumental in mobilizing the native Indian people to overthrow the Spanish government. And you'll note that in 1810, when he first mobilizes them, this is the time when the French Revolution, or at least I should say Napoleon, is largely in charge of the European continent. So this proves to be a good time. Father Hidalgo is a Creole. He has light complected skin, but he has very much common cause with the native people. And so he rises up somewhat differently from the people in Peru. He rises up in common cause with the native peoples. And it takes a while, but over a decade later, Mexico will proclaim its independence. And it will still have a rocky road ahead of it, but the challenge of throwing off Spanish rule is